Psychology of Human Behaviour, How to Read People Instantly Mindset Audiobook Part 1, Foundations of Human Behavior, Chapter 1, The Hidden Language of Humanity. Every single day, you interact with dozens, sometimes hundreds of people. You walk into a room and immediately sense the mood. You meet someone new and, within seconds, before a single meaningful word is exchanged, you have already formed an impression. Your subconscious mind has processed thousands of pieces of information: their posture, their eye contact, their micro-expressions, the tension in their jaw, the way they hold their coffee cup, and delivered a verdict. The question is, are you listening to what your subconscious is telling you? Most people go through life operating on autopilot when it comes to reading others. They take people at face value. They believe what they are told. They miss the subtle signals that scream volumes about a person's true intentions, emotions, and character. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a failure of attention. The ability to read people is not a mystical gift bestowed upon a chosen few. It is a skill. Like any skill, it can be learned, practiced, and mastered. The difference between someone who can read people instantly and someone who cannot is not talent. It is training. Consider the experience of Sarah, a hiring manager at a technology company in San Francisco. For years, Sarah relied primarily on resumes and structured interview questions to evaluate candidates. She looked at degrees, years of experience, and technical certifications. On paper, many candidates looked identical. Then Sarah attended a workshop on behavioral psychology and nonverbal communication. She began paying attention not just to what candidates said, but to how they said it. She noticed that when candidates talked about past achievements they were genuinely proud of, their eyes widened slightly, their hands opened up, and their voice gained a natural rhythm. When they fabricated or exaggerated, their blink rate increased, their gestures became more constrained, and there were tiny pauses, almost imperceptible, before key details. Within 6 months, Sarah's hiring accuracy improved dramatically. She reported that she could now predict within the first 3 minutes of an interview whether a candidate would be a strong fit, long before the conversation reached relevant experience. She was not reading minds, she was reading behavior. The field of behavioral psychology has spent over a century studying what makes humans tick. From Sigmund Freud's explorations of the unconscious mind to modern neuroscience's mapping of the brain, we have accumulated an enormous body of knowledge about why people do what they do. Here is what we know for certain: human beings are not rational creatures. We like to think we are. We construct elaborate narratives about our decisions, our preferences, and our beliefs, always positioning ourselves as logical actors making informed choices. But the reality is far messier. Research by psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, demonstrated that the vast majority of our decisions are made by what he calls System 1 thinking: fast, automatic, intuitive, and largely unconscious. System 2 thinking, the slow, deliberate, logical kind, is reserved for a tiny fraction of our mental activity. Most of the time, we are running on autopilot, and our autopilot is governed by biases, emotions, and deep-seated psychological patterns. This is not a weakness. It is how we evolved. Our ancestors needed to make split-second decisions about whether an approaching figure was friend or foe, whether a rustling in the bushes was a predator or the wind, whether a stranger's smile was genuine or a prelude to attack. Those who could read these signals quickly survived. Those who could not did not. We are the descendants of the readers. The ability is in our wiring. We just need to reactivate it. The first step to reactivating this ability is awareness. Most of the signals people send are below the threshold of conscious attention. You have probably walked away from a conversation with a vague feeling. Something was off. Something did not add up. You could not quite put your finger on it without ever identifying what triggered that feeling. This book will teach you to identify those triggers. You will learn to see what you have always seen but never noticed. You will learn to hear what you have always heard but never understood. And most importantly, you will learn to trust the information your subconscious is already processing. The ancient Romans had a phrase verba volant, scriptura manet. Words fly away, writings remain. A more accurate version for our purposes would be verba volant, gesta manet. Words fly away, deeds remain. People can say anything. Their behavior tells the truth. Throughout history, the most successful leaders, negotiators, and diplomats have been those who could read the people around them. Abraham Lincoln was famous for his ability to read the intentions of his political opponents. Winston Churchill could gauge the morale of a room within moments of entering it. Nelson Mandela, during his 27 years of imprisonment, studied his guards with such precision that he was able to turn several of them into allies. These were not people with supernatural abilities. They were people who paid attention. They observed. They listened, not just with their ears, but with their eyes and their intuition. And they practiced. Every interaction was an opportunity to refine their understanding of human nature. You've had the same opportunity. Every conversation, every meeting, every encounter is a chance to sharpen your ability to read people. The difference is that now you will have a framework for doing so. You will have tools and techniques that transform passive observation into active intelligence gathering. The concept of thin slicing was introduced by psychologists Nealini and Betty in the early 1990s. Her research demonstrated that people could make remarkably accurate judgments about others based on very brief exposure, sometimes as short as 2 seconds. In one study, students who watched 2-second silent clips of professors teaching to predict the professors' end-of-semester evaluations with surprising accuracy. This was not guesswork. It was the brain's ability to rapidly process a wealth of nonverbal information and synthesize it into a coherent judgment. The participants did not know what they were seeing. They could not articulate the specific cues that drove their judgments, but their subconscious minds were processing dozens of signals simultaneously: posture, gesture, facial expression, movement patterns, and arriving at conclusions that were often correct. The implication is profound. Your first impression of someone is often more accurate than your considered judgment after extended interaction. This sounds counterintuitive. We tend to assume that more information leads to better decisions, but in the case of social judgment, more information often means more noise. The initial signal gets diluted by rationalizations, biases, and the other person's carefully managed self-presentation. This does not mean you should always trust your first impression. It means you should take it seriously. Your first impression is your brain's rapid-fire assessment, and while it can be wrong, especially when filtered through your own biases and past experiences, it is almost always worth examining. Think about the last time you met someone who gave you a bad feeling. You probably could not explain why. Maybe their handshake felt slightly off. Maybe their smile did not reach their eyes. Maybe there was something about the way they held themselves that triggered a subtle alarm in your mind. Now think about what happened next. Did you ignore that feeling? Did you talk yourself out of it, telling yourself you were being paranoid or judgmental? Did you proceed to trust that person, only to discover later that your initial instinct was correct? If so, you are not alone. Research consistently shows that people who override their initial gut feelings in social situations often regret it. This does not mean gut feelings are infallible. It means they deserve more weight than most people give them. Consider another example. James, a real estate investor in Miami, was evaluating a potential business partner. The man, let us call him Robert, had an impressive track record. His references checked out. His financial statements looked solid. Everything on paper suggested a reliable partner. But James noticed something during their lunch meeting. When Robert talked about his previous partnerships, he consistently used the pronoun I rather than we. When James asked about the reasons his previous partnerships ended, Robert's gaze shifted down and to the right, a pattern often associated with emotional processing, and his speech rate slowed slightly. There was a pause of about 3 seconds before he answered. which is a long time in normal conversation. James did not confront Robert about these observations. He simply filed them away. He then did something most investors would not bother with. He tracked down the other partners from Robert's previous ventures and had extended conversations with them. What he learned confirmed his suspicions. Robert had a pattern of initially charming his partners, then gradually centralizing control and making unilateral decisions that benefited himself at their expense. James passed on the partnership. 6 months later, Robert's latest venture collapsed in a scandal that cost his investors millions. James' trained observation had saved him from a catastrophic financial loss. The lesson is clear: people tell you who they are, not with their words, but with their behavior. Your job is to listen with your eyes. Chapter 2: The Architecture of Human Personality. Before you can read people, you need to understand the fundamental structures that shape human personality and behavior. There are several frameworks that psychologists use, and understanding them gives you a lens through which to interpret what you observe. The most widely accepted model of personality in modern psychology is the Big Five, also known as OCEAN. Openness to experience. People high in openness are creative, curious, and adventurous. They seek novelty, enjoy abstract thinking, and are comfortable with ambiguity. People low in openness prefer routine, tradition, and concrete facts. In conversation, high openness individuals use more diverse vocabulary, ask more questions, and gravitate toward what-if scenarios. Low openness individuals prefer practical discussions and may become uncomfortable with too much abstraction. Conscientiousness. Highly conscientious people are organized, dependable, and disciplined. They plan ahead, meet deadlines, and maintain order. Low conscientiousness individuals are more spontaneous, flexible, and sometimes chaotic. You can read conscientiousness in the state of someone's workspace, the way they manage their time, and whether they follow through on commitments. Extroversion. Extroverts draw energy from social interaction. They are talkative, assertive, and enthusiastic. Introverts, by contrast, recharge through solitude and tend to be more reserved, reflective, and selective about their social engagements. The key distinction is not shyness versus boldness, but energy source, where a person gets their fuel. Agreeableness. Highly agreeable people are cooperative, warm, and trusting. They avoid conflict, prioritize harmony, and are empathetic. Low agreeableness individuals are more competitive, skeptical, and willing to challenge others. Both have their uses, but understanding where someone falls on this spectrum tells you a great deal about how they will behave in groups and under pressure. Neuroticism. People high in neuroticism experience more anxiety, mood swings, and emotional instability. They are more reactive to stress and more likely to perceive situations as threatening. Low neuroticism individuals are calm, resilient, and emotionally stable. Neuroticism is one of the most important traits to read because it directly affects how people respond to pressure. Like the example, Marcus and David were childhood friends who decided to start a restaurant together. On the surface, they shared a vision of farm-to-table bistro in a growing neighborhood, but their personalities were fundamentally different. Marcus was high in openness and low in conscientiousness. He was full of creative ideas, themed nights, fusion dishes, and ever-changing menu, but he consistently missed deadlines, forgot supplier meetings, and left financial paperwork until the last minute. His energy was infectious, but his disorganization was maddening. David was high in conscientiousness and low in openness. He built spreadsheets, maintained schedules, and ensured every health inspection was passed with flying colors. But he resisted Marcus's more ambitious ideas, preferring the safe, proven dishes that had worked in their first year. The restaurant eventually failed, not because the food was bad or the location was wrong, but because the partners could not bridge the personality gap. Had they understood each other's psychological architecture, they could have divided responsibilities accordingly. Marcus handling creative direction and customer experience, David handling operations and finance. Instead, They spent 2 years in escalating conflict, each trying to force the other into their own mold. Understanding personality is not just an academic exercise. It is the foundation of every relationship, every partnership, every interaction you will ever have. The dark triad, no discussion of personality is complete without addressing the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These are the personality traits associated with manipulation, exploitation, and antisocial behavior. Narcissism is characterized by grandiosity, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. Narcissists present themselves as special, entitled, and deserving of attention. They charm quickly, but their interest in others is purely instrumental. When you stop serving their needs, you become invisible, or worse, an obstacle. Machiavellianism is strategic, calculating manipulation. People high in this trait are skilled at reading others and using that information for personal gain. They are patient, long-term manipulators who build networks of influence and loyalty that serve their agenda. Psychopathy is the most dangerous of the three. Psychopaths are characterized by a complete absence of empathy, guilt, or remorse. They're impulsive, superficially charming, and capable of extreme cruelty. While full-blown psychopathy is rare, affecting roughly 1% of the population, subclinical psychopathic traits are more common than most people realize. Life example: Jennifer worked at a marketing firm where a new colleague, Amanda, quickly became the office favorite. Amanda was charming, funny, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. She remembered everyone's birthday, offered compliments that felt genuine, and was always the first to volunteer for team projects. Over time, Jennifer noticed a pattern. Amanda's kindness was strategic. She was particularly warm to people in positions of power and dismissive of those who were not. When a promotion came up, Amanda suddenly became distant with colleagues who were competing for the same role. After securing the promotion, partly by taking credit for a campaign Jennifer had led, Amanda's warmth evaporated. The colleague who had once been her biggest supporter was now an inconvenience. This is classic Machiavellianism, the calculated use of charm and warmth as tools for advancement. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but they were easy to miss because Amanda's behavior was wrapped in such pleasant packaging. The Myers-Briggs type indicator, while less scientifically rigorous than the Big Five, offers another useful framework. It categorizes people along 4 dimensions: extroversion versus introversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. While the MBTI has limitations, it provides a useful vocabulary for discussing personality differences. Consider how these dimensions play out in real life. A thinking, judging person in a meeting will want to get to the point quickly, make decisions based on logic, and leave with clear action items. A feeling, perceiving person will want to discuss the human impact of decisions, consider multiple perspectives, and leave room for flexibility. Neither approach is wrong, but when these styles collide without understanding, the result is frustration and conflict. The key insight is this: people are not difficult. They are different. When you understand the architecture of their personality, you can predict their behavior, adjust your communication style, and build bridges where walls would otherwise form. Chapter 3: The Neuroscience of Perception. To truly understand how to read people, you need to understand what is happening in your brain when you interact with another human being. Mirror neurons were discovered in the 1990s. Mirror neurons are brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing that same action. When you see someone smile, your mirror neurons for smiling activate. When you see someone in pain, your pain neurons fire. This is the neurological basis of empathy. You do not just observe others' emotions, you literally experience them in your own brain. This is why being around happy people makes you feel happy, and being around anxious people makes you anxious. Your mirror neurons are synchronizing with their emotional state. This is also why reading people is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a visceral, felt experience. Your body is constantly mirroring the people around you, providing you with information that your conscious mind may not even register. The amygdala and threat detection. The amygdala is your brain's alarm system. It processes emotional information, especially threats, faster than your conscious mind can think. When you walk into a room and immediately feel uncomfortable around someone, it is likely your amygdala that is sounding the alarm. It has detected something, a micro-expression, a change in vocal tone, a subtle shift in body language that signals potential danger. The problem is that the amygdala is not always right. It evolved to protect us from predators on the savannah, not from manipulative colleagues in conference rooms. It tends to err on the side of caution, which means it sometimes flags harmless people as threats. Learning to read people involves calibrating your amygdala, learning to distinguish between genuine threats and false alarms. The prefrontal cortex and social cognition. The prefrontal cortex, located behind your forehead, is responsible for higher-order social cognition. It allows you to take another person's perspective, understand their intentions, predict their behavior, and navigate complex social situations. It works in tandem with the amygdala, providing context and nuance to the amygdala's rapid assessments. People with well-developed prefrontal cortex function are better at reading others because they can integrate multiple streams of information, verbal content, body language, vocal tone, context, past behavior into a coherent picture. They resist snap judgments and instead build a more complete understanding. The vagus nerve and social engagement. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory reveals that our nervous system has three states: ventral vagal social engagement, sympathetic fight or flight, and dorsal vagal freeze or shutdown. When we feel safe, our ventral vagal system is active. We are open, engaged, and capable of reading others accurately. When we feel threatened, our sympathetic system takes over. Our attention narrows, our ability to read subtle cues diminishes, and we become reactive rather than responsive. This has profound implications for reading people. You can only accurately read someone when your own nervous system is in a state of relative calm. When you're stressed, anxious, or angry, your ability to perceive others accurately drops dramatically. This is why important negotiations should never happen when either party is upset. Life example. Dr. Amanda Chen, a clinical psychologist in New York, was working with a patient who insisted she was fine. The patient's words said she was coping well. Her posture said otherwise. Amanda noticed that the patient's shoulders were raised slightly toward her ears, a chronic tension pattern associated with anxiety. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Her feet, crossed at the ankle, were bouncing rhythmically, a self-soothing behavior. Amanda also noticed something in her own body. Through the mechanism of mirror neurons, she felt a slight tightening in her own chest when the patient spoke. This was not Amanda's anxiety. It was her nervous system mirroring the patient's hidden distress. Rather than confronting the patient directly, Amanda gently asked about sleep patterns, appetite, and daily routines. The patient's answers revealed significant disruption in all three areas. Only then did the truth emerge. The patient was barely holding it together, masking a severe anxiety disorder with a cheerful facade. The neuroscience of perception teaches us that reading people is a whole-body experience. Your brain is not just processing visual and auditory data, it is simulating the other person's emotional state in your own neural circuits. The more tuned you are to these signals, the more accurately you can read the people around you. The neurotransmitter oxytocin plays a crucial role in social bonding and trust. When you have positive social interactions, your brain releases oxytocin, which enhances your ability to read emotions and increases your trust in others. Conversely, when you have been betrayed or hurt, your oxytocin response can become blunted, making it harder to read people accurately. This creates a vicious cycle. Betrayal leads to reduced trust, which leads to poor social reading, which leads to more vulnerability to betrayal. Understanding these neurological mechanisms does not make you a robot. It makes you a more effective human being. When you understand how your brain processes social information, you can work with your biology rather than against it. You can create conditions that enhance your ability to read others, and you can recognize when your own neurological state is interfering with your accuracy. Part 2, the ART of Body Language, Chapter 4, The Body Never Lies. The single most important principle in meeting people is this: the body never lies. Words can be carefully chosen. Facial expressions can be controlled, but the body, the posture, the gestures, the micro-movements, is governed by the autonomic nervous system, which operates largely outside conscious control. This is where the truth lies. The feet tell the truth. Most people focus on faces when trying to read others. This is a mistake. The face is the most practiced and controlled part of the body. People spend their entire lives learning to manage their facial expressions. The feet, by contrast, receive almost no attention, and yet the feet are one of the most honest parts of the body. When someone is engaged in a conversation and their feet are pointed toward you, they are genuinely interested. When their feet start pointing toward the exit, they are ready to leave, even if their face and words suggest otherwise. When someone crosses their legs toward you, they are comfortable and open. When they cross them away, they are creating a barrier. Life example: Tom, a real estate agent in Chicago, learned this lesson the hard way. He was showing a luxury condo to a couple who seemed enthusiastic. They asked detailed questions about the neighborhood, discussed renovations they would make, and even talked about where they would put their furniture. Their words said yes. Their feet said no. Throughout the showing, the wife's feet were consistently pointed toward the door. When they paused in the kitchen, she shifted her weight onto her back foot, a subtle distancing signal. When Tom showed them the master bedroom, the husband's feet were angled away from the room and toward the hallway. Tom closed the showing confidently, certain he had a sale. They never returned his calls. Had he read their feet, he could have addressed their unspoken concerns during the showing rather than after. The hands speak volumes. Open palms are one of the oldest and most universal signals of honesty and openness. When someone shows you their palms, they are subconsciously saying, "I have nothing to hide." This is an evolutionary signal, showing that you are not holding a weapon. Conversely, hidden hands, hands in pockets, behind the back, or clasped tightly can indicate discomfort, concealment, or defensiveness. This does not mean that everyone with their hands in their pockets is lying, but it is a data point that, combined with other signals, can be telling. The speed and direction of hand gestures also matter. Upward gestures tend to be associated with honesty and positivity. Downward gestures are more associated with authority and certainty, but also with suppression. Rapid, energetic gestures suggest enthusiasm and engagement. Slow, deliberate gestures suggest careful thought or, in some cases, an attempt to control the pace of the interaction. The power of stance, how people stand, tells you a great deal about their emotional state and their relationship to you and the situation. An open stance, feet shoulder-width apart, arms relaxed at the sides, chest exposed, signals confidence, comfort, and openness. This is the stance of someone who feels secure in their environment. A closed stance, arms crossed, legs crossed, body angled away, signals defensiveness, discomfort, or a desire to protect oneself. This is the stance of someone who feels threatened or wants to create distance. A leaning in stance suggests interest and engagement. A leaning out stance suggests disengagement or a desire to escape. Life example: when Rachel went on her first date with Jake, she paid attention to his body from the very beginning. At the coffee shop, Jake leaned forward when she spoke, maintained open posture, and kept his palms visible on the table. His feet were pointed toward her, not toward the door. When she told a joke, his laughter was accompanied by an open hand gesture across his chest, a sign of genuine enjoyment. When they moved to a restaurant, Rachel noticed that Jake maintained the same open body language. He did not check his phone. He did not scan the room for other people. His attention was fully directed at her, and his body confirmed it. Contrast this with her previous state, where the man's words said he was having a great time, but his body told a different story. He kept his arms crossed. His feet were angled toward the exit. He checked his phone twice. When she excused herself to the restroom, he immediately pulled out his phone and started texting. His body language shifted from performative engagement to genuine relaxation only when he thought she was not watching. Rachel's ability to read these signals saved her from wasting time on people who were not genuinely interested and helped her recognize Jake's authentic interest. Spatial distances and intimate zones. Anthropologist Edward T. Hall identified 4 zones of interpersonal distance. The intimate zone 0 to 18 inches is reserved for close relationships, partners, children, very close friends. The personal zone 18 inches to 4 feet is where most social interactions occur. The social zone 4 to 12 feet is used for formal interactions. The public zone over 12 feet is for public speaking and large gatherings. When someone intrudes into your intimate zone uninvited, it triggers an immediate threat response. This is why pushy salespeople who stand too close make you uncomfortable. They are violating your spatial boundaries. Conversely, when someone allows you into their intimate zone, it is a signal of deep trust and comfort. Life example of therapist named Michael noticed that when his patients were making progress, they gradually decreased the physical distance between themselves and him. Patients who were guarded and defensive would sit at the far end of the couch, maintain maximum distance, and keep objects, a purse, a notebook, a water bottle between themselves and the therapist. As therapy progressed and trust developed, these same patients would sit closer, remove the barriers, and lean in during important conversations. Michael used the spatial information as a barometer of therapeutic progress. When a patient who had been gradually moving closer suddenly pulled back, increasing distance, recrossing legs away, creating barriers, it was often a signal that something in the therapy had triggered a defensive response. This allowed Michael to address issues before they became entrenched. Feet and territory. The way people position their feet in relation to objects and spaces tells you about their sense of ownership and territorial behavior. When someone drapes their jacket over a chair at a restaurant, they are marking territory. When they put their feet up on a desk, they are signaling that they feel ownership of that space. When they position themselves between you and the exit, they are consciously or unconsciously controlling your ability to leave. This territorial behavior is deeply primal. In the animal kingdom, the dominant member of a group claims the best territory and defends it aggressively. Humans do the same thing, just more subtly. The CEO who is the corner office, the employee who claims the best parking spot, the friend who always chooses where the group will sit at a restaurant. These are all expressions of territorial behavior. Reading territory signals helps you understand power dynamics. When you enter someone's office and they stand behind their desk while you remain in a chair on the other side, you are in a subordinate position. When someone invites you behind the desk to look at something on their computer, they are signaling trust and equality. Chapter 5, Microexpressions. The truth in a flash. Microexpressions are involuntary facial expressions that last between 1/25th and 1/5 of a second. They are triggered by genuine emotions and are virtually impossible to fake. They are the closest thing to a window into someone's true feelings that exists. The 7 universal microexpressions. Psychologist Paul Ekman identified 7 universal microexpressions that are recognized across all cultures. Happiness, the corners of the mouth pull up and outward, and the muscles around the eyes contract, creating crow's feet. Genuine happiness involves the eyes. If someone smiles, but their eyes do not crinkle, the smile is likely forced. This is why a genuine smile is called a Duchenne smile. It involves both the zygomatic major muscle, which pulls up the corners of the mouth, and the orbicularis oculi muscle, which crinkles the eyes. Sadness, the inner corners of the eyebrows pull up and together. The corners of the mouth turn down. The lower lip may tremble. This is one of the hardest microexpressions to detect because people are skilled at masking sadness. In many cultures, showing sadness is considered weak, so people learn to suppress it. But the eyebrows are notoriously difficult to control. The corrugator supercilii muscle, which pulls the eyebrows together, is one of the hardest facial muscles to consciously manipulate. Anger, the eyebrows pull down and together, creating a furrow. The nostrils flare. The lips press together tightly. The eyes narrow. Anger microexpressions are often brief because people learn early that showing anger has social costs. The exception is when anger is combined with contempt. The smirk and frown combination that signals I'm better than you and I am angry about it. Fear, the eyebrows raise and pull together. The upper eyelids raise, exposing more of the white of the eye. The mouth opens slightly. Fear is one of the most quickly concealed emotions because it signals vulnerability. In competitive environments, showing fear is like showing weakness to a predator. It invites attack. So people learn to mask fear with anger, indifference, or humor. Surprise, the eyebrows raise high. The eyes widen. The jaw drops. Surprise is the briefest of all microexpressions because it is quickly replaced by the emotion that follows: fear, happiness, anger, or confusion. Pure surprise lasts only a fraction of a second before the brain categorizes the surprising event and generates an appropriate emotional response. Disgust, the nose wrinkles. The upper lip raises. The lower lip pushes out. Disgust is one of the most honest microexpressions because it is deeply visceral and hard to control. When someone is genuinely disgusted by something, their face contorts before they can stop it. This is why food commercials that show people reacting with disgust to competitors' products are so effective. The reactions look real because they are real. Contempt, one corner of the mouth raises in a slight smirk. This is the only asymmetrical microexpression and the most difficult to detect. It signals superiority, disdain, or dismissal. Contempt is particularly dangerous in relationships because it signals that one person has decided they are better than the other. Research by John Gottman has shown that contempt is the single greatest predictor of relationship failure. Life example: during a salary negotiation, David noticed something when he presented his counteroffer. The HR manager's face flickered, just for an instant, with a microexpression of contempt. One corner of the mouth twitched upward. It was gone in less than a second, replaced by neutral, professional expression. That microexpression told David everything he needed to know. The HR manager did not take his counteroffer seriously. She believed his ask was beneath consideration. Rather than pushing harder on the same number, David pivoted. He asked about the company's performance review timeline and whether there was flexibility for a 6-month salary review tied to specific performance metrics. The HR manager's body language shifted immediately. She leaned forward, her voice warmed, and she began discussing details. David had read the contempt microexpression correctly and adjusted his strategy accordingly. He ended up with a lower starting salary, but a performance review clause that resulted in a significant raise after 6 months. How to practice detecting microexpressions. The key to detecting microexpressions is attention. Most people look at faces but do not truly see them. They see the overall expression, the smile, the frown, but miss the fleeting flashes that reveal the underlying emotion. Practice by watching people in low-stakes environments. Observe the faces of newscasters, interview subjects, or people in coffee shops. Pay particular attention to transitions, the moment when someone's expression shifts from one emotion to another. That is where microexpressions lie. Paul Ekman developed a microexpression training tool called MET Microexpression Training Tool that has been shown to significantly improve people's ability to detect these fleeting expressions. The training involves watching videos of people displaying microexpressions and learning to identify them before they disappear. Another powerful exercise is to record yourself having conversations and then watch the recordings in slow motion. You will be amazed at how much information you were missing in real time. The expressions that flash across your conversation partner's face in a fraction of a second become clearly visible at 1/4 speed. Context matters. Microexpressions must always be interpreted in context. A fear microexpression during a horror movie means something very different from a fear microexpression during a business meeting. A disgust microexpression while eating something unpleasant is normal, but a disgust microexpression when you mention a specific person's name is highly informative. The key is to look for patterns. A single microexpression can mean many things, but if someone consistently displays content when talking about their boss, or fear when discussing a particular topic, or sadness when mentioning their family, those patterns tell a story that words cannot. Chapter 6. The Eyes. Windows to the soul. The eyes are the most expressive part of the face and the most frequently studied element of body language. While the body as a whole tells the story, the eyes often provide the punctuation. Pupil dilation. When people are interested, excited, or attracted to something, their pupils dilate. When they are disinterested, bored, or repulsed, their pupils constrict. This is an involuntary response controlled by the autonomic nervous system, and it is virtually impossible to fake. In conversation, if you see someone's pupils dilate when you mention a particular topic, you have found something that genuinely excites them. If their pupils constrict, they are either bored or put off. This is why lighting conditions matter when reading eyes. In dim lighting, everyone's pupils are dilated, making the signal less useful. In consistent lighting, however, pupil changes can be highly informative. Eye contact patterns. The amount and quality of eye contact someone maintains tells you about their confidence, interest, and honesty. Sustained, comfortable eye contact signals confidence, interest, and trustworthiness. People who maintain steady eye contact are generally perceived as more competent and reliable. Avoidant eye contact can signal many things: discomfort, shyness, guilt, or submission. It is important not to jump to conclusions. Cultural background significantly influences eye contact norms. In many Asian and African cultures, direct eye contact with authority figures is considered disrespectful, while in Western cultures it is expected. Rapid blinking can indicate stress, anxiety, or cognitive overload. When someone blinks much more than their normal rate, their brain is processing information under pressure. The direction of gaze can also be informative. In right-handed people, looking up and to the left often indicates the construction of a visual image. They may be imagining or constructing something. Looking up and to the right often indicates the recall of a visual memory. Looking down and to the left often indicates internal dialogue. Looking down and to the right often indicates engagement with emotions. These patterns are not universal rules, but they can serve as useful starting points. Life example: Detective Lisa Chen used eye contact analysis to crack a cold case. A witness in a hit-and-run was being interviewed, and the official transcript recorded a consistent alibi. But Lisa noticed something during the interview that the transcript could not capture. When the witness was asked about the color of the car, his eyes moved up and to the left, the direction associated with visual construction rather than recall. He was not remembering the car, he was inventing it. Lisa probed further, asking the witness to describe the sequence of events in more detail. Each time the witness described a new element, his eyes moved to the construction direction. When he described elements that Lisa could verify, the time he left work, the route he took home, his eyes moved to the recall direction. The eye analysis was not proof of deception, but it gave Lisa probable cause to investigate further. She eventually discovered that the witness had been driving the car that caused the accident and had fabricated his entire alibi. His eyes had told the truth even when his words did not. The social meaning of eye contact is one of the most powerful social signals humans possess. It establishes connection, communicates dominance, expresses intimacy, and signals aggression, all depending on context. Mutual eye contact creates a sense of connection and intimacy. This is why lovers gaze into each other's eyes and why prolonged eye contact with a stranger can feel intrusive or threatening. When someone breaks eye contact with you during an important statement, it can indicate discomfort with what they are saying, which may mean they are lying, or it may mean they are discussing something emotionally difficult. You must use context to determine which. The timing of eye contact is often more informative than the amount. People who look away at the exact moment they make a key statement may be uncomfortable with that statement. People who increase eye contact during a lie may be trying to compensate for the deception by appearing more trustworthy. In normal conversation, people maintain eye contact for about 60% of the time while speaking and 70% while listening. When these ratios shift significantly, much more eye contact than normal or much less, something is happening beneath the surface. The hard stare, a sustained, unblinking stare, is a power move. It communicates dominance, aggression, or intense focus. This is why interrogators use it, to create discomfort and break down resistance. In everyday life, a hard stare during conversation can be intimidating and is usually a sign that the person is trying to assert control. Conversely, the ability to maintain comfortable eye contact under pressure is a sign of genuine confidence. This is why trained negotiators, therapists, and interrogators can hold eye contact while discussing uncomfortable topics. They have trained themselves to remain present and engaged even when the conversation gets difficult. Eye expressions beyond the basics, the eyes communicate much more than simple emotions. They reveal cognitive processes, social intentions, and personality traits. Interest is shown through narrowed eyes and a slight forward lean. The eyes focus more intently on the object of interest. Boredom is shown through unfocused, glassy eyes that drift around the room. Disapproval is communicated through a slight squint combined with a downward turn of the inner eyebrows. This expression says, "I am evaluating you and finding you wanting." Sympathy and compassion are shown through soft, wide eyes combined with a slight head tilt. This is the expression we use with children and with people who are suffering. Life example: Maria, a customer service manager at a hotel, became expert at reading the eyes of arriving guests. She learned that when guests' eyes were bright and wide as they approached the front desk, they were excited about their stay and ready to be impressed. When their eyes were narrowed and focused, they were often on a business trip and wanted efficiency over friendliness. When their eyes were slightly unfocused and distant, they were often tired from travel and needed patience and kindness rather than enthusiasm. Maria trained her staff to read these eye cues and adjust their approach accordingly. The result was a dramatic improvement in guest satisfaction scores. Guests felt understood and valued, even though they could not articulate why. The secret was that Maria's team was reading their eyes and responding to their unspoken emotional needs. Part 3: Voice, Words, and Emotional Intelligence, Chapter 7: The Voice, What Tone Reveals. If the body is the canvas of human behavior, the voice is the paint. The way someone speaks, the pitch, pace, volume, rhythm, and timbre, reveals as much as what they actually say. In many cases, it reveals more. The pitch, pace, volume, connection. When people are nervous or deceptive, their pitch tends to rise. When they are confident and sincere, their pitch remains steady or drops slightly. This is why nervous liars often sound higher-pitched than usual. Their vocal cords tighten under stress, producing a higher frequency. Pace is equally revealing. People who are excited or anxious tend to speak faster. People who are thoughtful and deliberate speak more slowly. When someone suddenly slows their speech rate during a conversation, they are often being more careful with their words, which may mean they are about to say something important or something untrue. Volume tells you about emotional state and social dynamics. People who speak quietly may be introverted, respectful, or hiding something. People who speak loudly may be confident, aggressive, or compensating for insecurity. A sudden change in volume, getting louder when they were speaking softly, or dropping to a whisper when they were speaking normally, often signals a shift in emotional state. Vocal qualities or breathiness can indicate intimacy, nervousness, or seduction. A breathy voice is often perceived as softer and more approachable. Vocal fry, that low, creaky sound at the end of sentences, can signal casualness, fatigue, or an attempt to sound authoritative and relaxed. Trembling in the voice signals strong emotion, fear, anger, excitement, or grief. When someone's voice shakes, they are experiencing emotion powerful enough to override their vocal control. Life example Dr. Patricia Williams, a communication coach in Washington, D.C., worked with a politician preparing for a high-stakes debate. The politician was well-informed and articulate on paper, but in practice, his voice betrayed him under pressure. When confronted with difficult questions, his pitch rose, his pace quickened, and his volume dropped. He sounded defensive and uncertain, even when his answers were strong. Patricia trained him to recognize these patterns and counteract them. When he felt his pitch rising, he practiced taking a deep breath and consciously lowering his voice. When he felt his pace accelerating, he practiced pausing before answering, using the silence to gather his thoughts rather than rushing to fill it. The results were remarkable. In the debate, the politician appeared calm, confident, and in control, even when his opponent attacked him aggressively. His voice remained steady, his pace was measured, and his volume conveyed authority. The post-debate polls showed that viewers perceived him as more trustworthy and competent than his opponent, largely because of how he sounded. The mirroring of vocal patterns. When people rapport well with each other, they unconsciously begin to mirror each other's vocal patterns. They match pitch, pace, and volume. This is a powerful indicator of connection and trust. When someone mirrors your vocal patterns, they are signaling that they feel connected to you and are open to your influence. When someone refuses to mirror your patterns, maintaining a very different pitch, pace, or volume, they are maintaining distance and independence. This is why skilled salespeople and negotiators practice vocal mirroring. By subtly matching the other person's vocal patterns, they create a sense of rapport and trust. The other person feels understood and connected, even if they cannot explain why. Silence, as communication, the most powerful vocal tool, is also the most overlooked silence. In Western culture, silence is uncomfortable. People rush to fill it, often with meaningless chatter. But silence in conversation serves a critical function. When you leave a pause after asking a question, you signal that you genuinely want an answer. You give the other person space to think, to process, to formulate a response that is authentic rather than reflexive. When someone asks you a question and you pause before answering, you signal that you're taking the question seriously. You're not giving a canned response. You are thinking. Life example, a hostage negotiator named Chris Voss, who worked for the FBI for 24 years, mastered the art of silence in negotiation. When he was negotiating with kidnappers, he would ask a question and then wait, sometimes for 30 seconds, sometimes for a minute, in complete silence. The kidnappers, uncomfortable with the silence, would often fill it with information they did not intend to share. The silence worked because it created a vacuum that human nature abhors. People are uncomfortable with silence in conversation because it feels like a gap that needs to be filled. In negotiation, the person who fills the gap first often reveals the most. Voss applied this principle in everyday life as well. In business negotiations, he would make an offer and then go silent. The other party, feeling the pressure of the silence, would often make concessions just to break it. The silence communicated confidence. I am so sure of my position that I do not need to fill the air with justifications. Cultural vocal differences, different cultures have different vocal norms, and misreading these can lead to serious misunderstandings. In Mediterranean cultures, Overlapping speech and loud conversation are signs of engagement and enthusiasm. In Japanese culture, silence and soft speech are signs of respect and thoughtfulness. An American business person negotiating with a Japanese counterpart might interpret the Japanese person's silence as disengagement or disagreement. In reality, the silence may indicate deep consideration and respect for the gravity of the decision. Pushing for an immediate response could be seen as rude and impatient. Understanding cultural vocal norms is essential for accurate reading across cultures. What sounds aggressive in one culture may sound enthusiastic in another. What sounds dishonest in one culture may sound respectful in another. Chapter 8 Words. What people really mean. People use words as masks. They say what they think they should say, what they think you want to hear, or what protects them from vulnerability. The challenge is to listen past the words to the meaning underneath. The language of deception, research on linguistic deception, has identified several patterns that appear consistently in the speech of people who are lying. Liars tend to use fewer self-references, I, me, my, because they are psychologically distancing themselves from the lie. They also use more negative language because lying creates cognitive dissonance, which generates negative emotions. Liars often over-explain. Honest people give simple, direct answers. Liars provide excessive detail and justification because they are trying to build a convincing narrative. If someone gives you a paragraph-long answer to a yes or no question, pay attention. Liars frequently hedge their statements. Phrases like I believe, I think, as far as I can remember, and to the best of my knowledge, introduce uncertainty and provide plausible deniability. Life example: Mark, a financial advisor, was reviewing an investment proposal from a colleague. The colleague presented the proposal with great enthusiasm, using phrases like I am absolutely certain, and this is guaranteed to succeed. But when Mark asked specific questions about the underlying assumptions, the colleague's language shifted. He began using phrases like I think the projections are reasonable, and as far as I can tell, the risk is manageable. Mark had been trained to listen for linguistic shifts. The transition from absolute certainty to hedged language was a red flag. He investigated further and discovered that the colleague had cherry-picked data to make the proposal look stronger than it was. Mark's careful listening saved his clients from a bad investment. The language of control. Certain phrases and patterns are designed to control rather than communicate. These include you-should statements that impose the speaker's values on you. Should statements are judgment disguised as advice. We need to statements that assume consensus where none exists. When someone says we need to, they are often speaking only for themselves. I am just being honest prefaces that signal the speaker is about to say something hurtful and wants to avoid accountability. People who are genuinely honest do not need to announce it. You always and you never statements that use absolutes to generalize and criticize. These statements are almost always factually inaccurate and are designed to shut down discussion. Life examples. Karen recognized these controlling language patterns in her relationship with her husband, David. David frequently used you always statements. You always interrupt me. You never listen. You always put your friends first. Karen initially accepted these statements as accurate reflections of her behavior. She tried to change, bending over backward to prove she could listen, that she did care, that she was not always putting others first. But no matter what she did, David found new examples of her failings. It was only when Karen started studying communication patterns that she understood what was happening. David's use of absolutes was not accurate feedback. It was a control mechanism. By framing her behavior in the most extreme terms possible, he put her on the defensive and shifted the focus from his own behavior to hers. Once Karen recognized this pattern, she stopped accepting the absolutes. Instead, she responded with specific, concrete language. I did not always do that. Can you give me a specific example? This forced David to either provide evidence, which he rarely could, or acknowledge that his statements were exaggerated. The language of connection Positive communication has its own markers. People who are genuinely interested in you use your name more frequently. They ask follow-up questions. They reference things you said earlier in the conversation. They use inclusive language. We, us, our, that signals a sense of partnership. The most powerful linguistic signal of genuine interest is a follow-up question. When someone asks a follow-up question, they are saying, I was listening. What you said mattered to me. I want to know more. Research by Harvard psychologist Michael Norton found that people who ask more follow-up questions are perceived as more likable and trustworthy. Life example Lisa, a journalist, noticed that her best interviews came when she focused on asking follow-up questions rather than moving to the next item on her list. When an interviewee mentioned something interesting, Lisa would say, tell me more about that, or what happened next, or how did that make you feel? These follow-up questions served two purposes. First, they elicited richer, more detailed responses. Second, they signaled to the interviewee that Lisa was genuinely interested, which caused the interviewee to open up more and share information they might otherwise have withheld. The contrast was clear when Lisa reviewed transcripts of interviews where she had stuck to her prepared questions. Those interviews were surface level and generic. The interviews where she had followed the conversational thread, asking follow-up questions wherever they led, were deep, revealing, and often contained the most newsworthy material. Reading between the lines, sometimes the most important information is in what someone does not say. When you ask someone a question and they redirect, deflect, or change the subject, they are telling you something, just not with words. When someone answers a different question than the one you asked, they are avoiding the real question. When someone gives a vague answer to a specific question, they are either unsure or hiding something. When someone becomes defensive in response to a neutral question, the question touched a nerve. Life example, a manager named Alex was conducting performance reviews. One employee, Brian, received feedback about chronic tardiness. When Alex brought it up, Brian did not address the tardiness directly. Instead, he talked about how hard he had been working on his projects, how he had stayed late 3 times last week, how he felt the feedback was unfair given his overall performance. Alex recognized the deflection. Brian was not addressing the issue because addressing it would require admitting a problem. Alex gently but firmly brought the conversation back to the specific behavior. I understand that you've been working hard, and I appreciate that, but the tardiness is a separate issue. Can we talk about what is happening with your morning schedule? This direct approach, informed by Alex's ability to read the deflection, led to a productive conversation. Brian eventually admitted that he had been struggling with insomnia, which made mornings difficult. Together, Alex and Brian developed a solution, a slightly adjusted start time that accommodated Brian's health issue while meeting the team's needs. Chapter 9, Emotional Intelligence. Reading the room. Emotional intelligence, or EIC, is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage your own emotions, as well as to recognize, understand, and influence the emotions of others. It is the meta skill that makes all other people reading skills possible. The 4 components of emotional intelligence. Daniel Goleman, who popularized the concept of emotional intelligence, identified 4 core components: self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, and relationship management. Self-awareness is the foundation. You cannot read others accurately if you cannot read yourself. Self-aware people know their strengths, weaknesses, triggers, and emotional patterns. They know when they're stressed, when they are biased, and when their judgment is compromised. Self-regulation is the ability to manage your emotional responses. When someone says something that triggers anger, self-regulation allows you to pause, assess the situation, and choose your response rather than reacting impulsively. This is essential for reading people because strong emotions, especially anger and fear, narrow your attention and distort your perception. Social awareness is the ability to read the emotional states of others and of groups. It includes empathy, organizational awareness, and service orientation. Socially aware people walk into a room and immediately sense the mood. They pick up on unspoken tensions, unexpressed concerns, and hidden dynamics. Relationship management is the ability to use your emotional intelligence to build and maintain healthy relationships. It includes influence, conflict management, teamwork, and inspiration. People with strong relationship management skills can adapt their communication style to different people and situations, building trust and rapport even in difficult circumstances. Like the example, Sarah, a team leader at a software company, had a team member named Carlos who had become increasingly quiet in meetings. Carlos had always been vocal and engaged, offering ideas and pushing back on proposals he disagreed with. Over the course of a month, he had become withdrawn, contributing only when directly asked and offering minimal responses. Other team members barely noticed. They were focused on their own work and assumed Carlos was just busy. But Sarah's emotional intelligence flagged the change. She noticed that Carlos was not just quieter, his posture had changed too. He sat with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the table rather than on the speaker. His usual energetic gestures had disappeared. Sarah did not address this in a team setting, which would have put Carlos on the spot. Instead, she invited him for a one-on-one coffee and started with a general question about how things were going. Carlos initially said everything was fine, but Sarah's gentle, persistent attention, she maintained soft eye contact, leaned slightly forward, and kept a patient silence after his initial answer, eventually drew out the truth. Carlos had been passed over for a promotion he believed he deserved. He felt undervalued and was considering leaving the company. By reading the room, or more accurately, by reading Carlos, Sarah was able to address the issue before it escalated. She advocated for Carlos with upper management, and within 2 months, he received the promotion he had earned. The empathy spectrum. Empathy comes in 3 forms: cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and compassionate empathy. Cognitive empathy. It is the ability to understand another person's perspective and mental state. It is intellectual rather than emotional. You can understand that someone is sad without feeling sad yourself. This form of empathy is useful for negotiation and strategic communication. Emotional empathy is feeling what another person feels. When your friend is sad, you feel sad. When your colleague is excited, you feel excited. Emotional empathy creates deep connection, but can be exhausting if not managed properly. Compassionate empathy combines understanding and feeling with action. You understand the other person's situation, you feel their emotions, and you are moved to help. This is the highest form of empathy and the most useful for building meaningful relationships. Life example: a nurse named David worked in a busy emergency room. Every day, he encountered people in crisis, accident victims, sick children, elderly patients in pain. To survive emotionally, David had to develop strong cognitive empathy without becoming overwhelmed by emotional empathy. He learned to understand his patient's fear and pain without absorbing it, which allowed him to provide compassionate care without burning out. But David also recognized that emotional empathy had its place. When a young mother brought in her sick child, David allowed himself to feel a fraction of her fear and anxiety. This emotional connection enabled him to communicate with her in a way that was both professional and deeply human. The mother later wrote a letter to the hospital saying that David was the first person who made her feel that her child was in caring hands. Reading the room. Group dynamics are more complex than individual interactions. Reading a room requires you to simultaneously process multiple signals. Who is making eye contact with them, who is leaning in and who is leaning away, who is speaking and who is silent, who is nodding and who is frowning. The concept of emotional contagion is crucial here. Emotions spread through groups like viruses. When one person is anxious, others pick up on that anxiety, often unconsciously. When one person is enthusiastic, Others become more enthusiastic. This is why the mood of the leader has such a profound impact on the team. Life example: Angela, a CEO of a technology startup, noticed that her anxiety about an upcoming product launch was spreading to her team. She had been working 18-hour days, checking every detail obsessively, and expressing concern about potential problems. Her team had picked up on her anxiety and was becoming increasingly stressed and less productive. Angela recognized what was happening to her emotional intelligence. She realized that her anxiety was not helping, it was contagious, and was undermining her team's confidence. She made a conscious decision to project calm confidence, even though she remained privately concerned. She held a team meeting where she acknowledged the pressure, but expressed confidence in the team's ability to deliver. She delegated more tasks, showing trust in her team's capabilities. Within a week, the team's energy shifted. People were calmer, more focused, and more creative. The product launch, when it came, was a success. Angela's ability to read the emotional state of her team and adjust her own behavior accordingly had directly contributed to that success. Emotional hijacking: understanding emotional hijacking, the phenomenon where the amygdala overrides the prefrontal cortex in response to a perceived threat, is essential for reading people accurately. When you or the person you are observing is in a state of emotional hijacking, rational communication becomes nearly impossible. Signs that someone is emotionally hijacked include a sudden change in facial expression, a dramatic increase in volume or speech rate, repetitive or circular reasoning, physical tension, and an inability to consider alternative perspectives. When you detect emotional hijacking in someone, the worst thing you can do is try to reason with them. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, is offline. Instead, you must first help them return to a state of emotional regulation. This is done through calm, non-threatening body language, a soft, steady voice, and patient listening without judgment. Port for Dark Psychology and Manipulation, Chapter 10, How Manipulators Operate. Understanding manipulation is not about learning to manipulate others. It is about recognizing when manipulation is being used against you and protecting yourself from its effects. The best defense against manipulation is awareness. The manipulation cycle: manipulators follow a predictable pattern. Understanding this pattern allows you to recognize it in real time and break the cycle before it causes significant damage. Stage 1. Love bombing. The manipulator showers you with attention, affection, compliments, and gifts. They make you feel special, understood, and valued in ways you have never experienced before. This stage feels wonderful. It is designed to create a strong emotional bond that the manipulator can later exploit. Stage 2. Devaluation. Once the bond is established, the manipulator begins to subtly undermine your confidence. They make small critical comments about your appearance, your abilities, your judgment. They compare you unfavorably to others. They withdraw affection as punishment for perceived slights. The criticism is always subtle enough to be deniable: "I was just joking. You are too sensitive." Stage 3. Discarding. When you no longer serve the manipulator's needs, or when you begin to assert yourself, the manipulator discards you. This can happen abruptly: a sudden breakup, a sudden firing, a sudden social exclusion, or gradually with increasing distance and coldness. Stage 4. Hoovering. Named after the vacuum cleaner, hoovering is the manipulator's attempt to suck you back in after discarding you. They may reappear with apologies, promises of change, or appeals to your sympathy. If you return, the cycle begins again. Life example: Rachel experienced this cycle with her first boyfriend, Tom. The relationship began with an intensity that felt like a fairy tale. Tom was attentive, romantic, and seemingly perfect. He remembered every detail of their conversations, surprised her with thoughtful gifts, and made her feel like the most important person in the world. Then the devaluation began. It started small: a comment about how she was eating too much at dinner, a joke about her outfit in front of friends. Rachel laughed it off, just as Tom intended, but the comments became more frequent and more pointed. He criticized her career choices, her friends, even her family. When she objected, he accused her of being overreacting. When Rachel finally gathered the courage to leave, Tom's behavior shifted dramatically. He called her constantly, sent long emails professing his love, and showed up at her workplace with flowers. He promised to change, to get therapy, to be the man she deserved. Rachel, still emotionally attached, gave him another chance. The cycle repeated 3 more times before she finally broke free permanently. Recognizing the manipulation cycle is the first step to breaking it. If a relationship follows this pattern, intense idealization, gradual devaluation, discarding, and hoovering, it is almost certainly manipulative, regardless of how sincere the manipulator's apologies and promises may seem. The weapons of manipulation. Manipulators use a specific toolkit of psychological weapons. Understanding these weapons helps you recognize them when they are deployed. Guilt is one of the most powerful manipulative tools. Manipulators use guilt to control behavior. After everything I have done for you, this is how you repay me. The guilt may be based on real events, but it is weaponized to prevent you from setting boundaries or making choices that the manipulator dislikes. Fear is another primary weapon. Manipulators create fear of abandonment, fear of failure, fear of social judgment, or fear of physical harm. This fear keeps you compliant and prevents you from challenging the manipulator's authority. Obligation is the expectation that you owe the manipulator something. Loyalty, obedience, gratitude, based on past favors or the nature of your relationship. Manipulators keep a mental ledger of everything they have done for you and use it as leverage. Isolation is the systematic removal of your support network. Manipulators want you to depend solely on them for emotional support, information, and validation. They may criticize your friends and family, create conflicts between you and your loved ones, or simply monopolize your time until you have no one else to turn to. Life example: Michael, a talented graphic designer, found himself working for a boss named Victor who used all 4 weapons in combination. Victor began by praising Michael's work lavishly, making him feel valued and important, love bombing. He then gradually increased Michael's workload while decreasing his compensation, justifying it with statements like, "I have given you opportunities no one else would." Obligation. When Michael expressed concerns about the workload, Victor responded with threats. "There are plenty of other designers who would love your position." Fear. When Michael tried to maintain friendships outside of work, Victor scheduled meetings during social events and criticized Michael for not being a team player. Isolation. When Michael's performance inevitably declined under the crushing workload, Victor used it as evidence that Michael was not as talented as he thought. Guilt. Michael spent 3 years in this toxic work environment before a friend helped him recognize the manipulation. The friend, who had experienced a similar situation, pointed out the pattern: idealize, devalue, isolate, control. Once Michael saw the pattern, he was able to disengage, though the recovery from years of manipulation took significant time and therapeutic support. The manipulator profile. While manipulation can come from anyone, certain personality types are more prone to manipulative behavior. People with narcissistic personality disorder and the social personality disorder or borderline personality disorder are more likely to use manipulation as a primary interpersonal strategy. However, it is important not to pathologize all manipulation. Many people who manipulate are not mentally ill. They have simply learned that manipulation works. They grew up in environments where manipulation was modeled as an effective way to get needs met, and they continue using it because it has never been challenged. The most dangerous manipulators are those who combine intelligence, charm, and a lack of empathy. They can read people with remarkable accuracy, ironically, using many of the same skills this book teaches, and use that reading ability to exploit others. The gray rock method. One of the most effective defenses against manipulation is the gray rock method. When a manipulator cannot get an emotional reaction from you, they lose interest by becoming as boring and unresponsive as a gray rock. You deprive the manipulator of the emotional fuel they crave. This means giving short, unemotional responses, not sharing personal information that can be used against you, not reacting to provocations, not defending yourself against false accusations, simply stating facts and then going silent. This is not a long-term solution. It is a short-term survival strategy while you develop an exit plan from a manipulative relationship. But it can be remarkably effective at reducing the intensity of manipulation while you prepare to leave. Chapter 11, Gaslighting and Emotional Abuse. Gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation in which the abuser makes the victim question their own reality, memory, and perception. The term comes from the 1944 film Gaslight, in which a husband manipulates his wife into believing she is going insane. How gaslighting works. Gaslighting operates by systematically undermining your trust in your own perceptions. The gaslighter does this through several techniques. Denying reality. When you confront the gaslighter about something they did or said, they deny it happened. No, I never said that. You are imagining things. Over time, you begin to doubt your own memory, trivializing your feelings when you express hurt or anger. The gaslighter minimizes your emotions. You're overreacting. It was just a joke. Why are you so sensitive? This teaches you that your emotional responses are invalid. Countering your memory, the gaslighter insists that your memory of events is wrong. That is not how it happened. You are remembering it incorrectly. They may even manufacture evidence to support their version of events. Diverting and deflecting. When you try to discuss a specific issue, the gaslighter changes the subject or accuses you of the same behavior. We would not have this problem if you were not always starting arguments. Life example. Emily lived with a gaslighting partner named Daniel for 5 years. Daniel's manipulation was so subtle that Emily did not realize what was happening until a friend pointed it out. The signs were everywhere, but Emily had been trained by Daniel's constant gaslighting to distrust her own perceptions. Daniel would make plans with Emily, then deny making them when the time came. He would say hurtful things in front of friends, then insist he was just joking when Emily expressed hurt. He would rearrange items in their home, then deny doing it when Emily could not find things. Each incident, taken individually, seemed trivial, but collectively, it created a pervasive sense of unreality. Emily began to wonder if she was losing her mind. The turning point came when Emily's friend visited and witnessed Daniel's behavior firsthand. After the visit, the friend gently told Emily what she had observed. Daniel was systematically undermining Emily's confidence in her own perceptions. The friend helped Emily recognize the pattern and eventually helped her leave the relationship. Emotional abuse beyond gaslighting. Gaslighting is just one form of emotional abuse. Others include constant criticism that erodes self-esteem over time. This is different from constructive feedback. It is relentless, personal, and designed to make the victim feel worthless. Stonewalling, which involves refusing to communicate, giving the silent treatment, or withdrawing affection as punishment. Stonewalling is particularly damaging because it prevents resolution of conflict and creates a sense of abandonment. Humiliation, which involves embarrassing, mocking, or belittling the victim in public or private. Humiliation attacks the victim's dignity and self-respect. Isolation, which were discussed in the previous chapter but bears repeating in the context of emotional abuse. Isolation from friends and family is one of the most effective tools of emotional abusers because it removes the victim's support system and external perspective. The cycle of the emotional abuse typically follows a cycle similar to the manipulation cycle discussed in the previous chapter. There is a tension-building phase, an incident phase, a reconciliation phase, and a calm phase. The calm phase is often the most dangerous because it gives the victim hope that things will improve, keeping them trapped in the cycle. Life example: Robert, a middle school teacher, was in an emotionally abusive friendship with a colleague named Frank. Robert did not recognize the relationship. as abusive because Frank was not a romantic partner and the abuse was not physical, but the damage was real. Frank constantly belittled Robert's teaching methods, criticized his interactions with students, and undermined his confidence in front of other teachers. When Robert confronted Frank, Frank would deny the behavior or claim he was trying to help Robert improve. When Robert withdrew from Frank, Frank would become warm and supportive, reinforcing the bond. This cycle, attack, deny, charm, repeat, is the hallmark of emotional abuse. Robert eventually recognized it with the help of a therapist and slowly distanced himself from Frank. The recovery was difficult because Robert had internalized Frank's criticisms, genuinely believing he was a poor teacher. It took months of therapy to rebuild his professional confidence. Recognizing emotional abuse, the most insidious aspect of emotional abuse is that it often does not feel like abuse. The victim may feel confused, anxious, depressed, or uncertain without understanding why. They may blame themselves for the problems in the relationship. Key indicators that a relationship is emotionally abusive include you feel like you are walking on eggshells around the other person, you consistently feel worse about yourself after interacting with them, you find yourself apologizing constantly, even when you have done nothing wrong, you have lost interest in things you used to enjoy because the other person disapproved, you feel isolated from friends and family, you question your own sanity or perception of reality. If several of these indicators are present, the relationship is likely emotionally abusive, regardless of whether the abuser is a partner, parent, friend, or colleague. Breaking free, leaving an emotionally abusive relationship is one of the most difficult things a person can do. The abuse has typically eroded the victim's self-esteem to the point where they do not believe they deserve better. The abuse has also created a trauma bond, a powerful emotional attachment to the abuser that persists even after the victim recognizes the abuse. The first step is acknowledging that the relationship is abusive. This requires outside perspective, because the victim's own perspective has been distorted by the abuse. Talking to a trusted friend, family member, or therapist can provide the clarity needed to see the relationship for what it is. The second step is building a support system. Since abusers typically isolate their victims, rebuilding connections with friends and family is essential. These connections provide emotional support, practical assistance, and a reality check against further gaslighting. The third step is creating a safety plan. This includes financial preparation, housing arrangements, and legal protections if necessary. Leaving an abusive relationship can be dangerous, and safety must be the top priority. Chapter 12, Detecting Deception and Lies. Detecting lies is not about catching people in falsehoods. It is about understanding when someone's words do not match their reality, and using that information to make better decisions about how to proceed. The science of lie detection research has consistently shown that most people are terrible at detecting lies. The average accuracy rate is about 54%, barely better than chance. Even trained professionals, police officers, judges, customs agents, perform only slightly better. The reason for this poor performance is twofold. First, there is no single reliable cue to deception. Liars do not always avoid eye contact. Some maintain excessive eye contact to appear sincere. They do not always fidget. Some are perfectly still. They do not always give too much detail. Some give too little. Deception manifests differently in different people. Second, people tend to use the wrong cues. They look for nervousness, which is not a reliable indicator of lying. Many truthful people are nervous during questioning because the situation is stressful, not because they are being deceptive. Meanwhile, many liars are calm and confident because they've rehearsed their lies and have no conscience about deceiving. What the research actually shows, despite the difficulty of lie detection, research has identified several cues that are statistically associated with deception. Verbal cues. Liars tend to use fewer self-references, more negative emotion words, fewer sensory details, and more qualifying language, I think, I believe, probably. They also tend to repeat questions back to the questioner to buy time to formulate a response. Vocal cues liars often exhibit vocal changes, higher pitch, slower speech rate, increased pauses, and more ums and ahs. These are signs of cognitive load, as lying requires more mental effort than telling the truth. Behavioral cues liars may show incongruence between their words and their body language. They might say yes while shaking their head no. They might smile when discussing something sad. They might become overly still, attempting to control their body language. The baseline approach, or the most effective approach to lie detection, is establishing a baseline. Everyone has a normal pattern of behavior, their typical eye contact rate, gesture frequency, speech patterns, and posture. The key is to watch for deviations from this baseline when the stakes are high. Life example: a customs agent named Maria learned this principle through experience. She noticed that most travelers, when asked routine questions about their trip, gave similar responses with similar body language. They maintained a normal level of eye contact, spoke at a normal pace, and had relaxed posture. But when a traveler was concealing something, undeclared goods, undeclared cash, or false documents, their behavior deviated from baseline. Some became hyper-focused on maintaining eye contact. Some became excessively still. Some began speaking in a more rehearsed, formal manner than their casual responses had established. Maria learned to trust these deviations rather than looking for specific lie indicators. She would note the change from baseline and then probe further with targeted questions. The probing often caused the deception to become more apparent as the cognitive load of maintaining a lie increased. The power of open-ended questions, one of the most effective tools for detecting deception, is the open-ended question. Closed questions, "Did you do X?" can be answered with a simple yes or no, which makes lying easy. Open questions, "Tell me about what happened," require the respondent to construct a narrative, which is much harder to do when fabricating. When someone tells a lie, they are constructing a false narrative while simultaneously suppressing the true narrative. This dual processing is cognitively demanding and often results in a narrative that is less detailed, less vivid, and less emotionally coherent than a truthful account. Life example: a teacher named David suspected that one of his students, Tyler, had cheated on a test. Rather than confronting Tyler with a direct accusation, David used open-ended questions. He asked Tyler to walk him through the test, which question he answered first, how he approached each problem, what he was thinking as he worked through the material. Tyler's account was vague and lacked the specificity of a student who had genuinely worked through the test. He could not describe his thought process for individual questions. He could not explain why he had chosen certain approaches. His account had the rehearsed, general quality of a fabricated story. David used this information not to punish Tyler, but to address the underlying issue. He discovered that Tyler had been struggling with the material and had cheated out of desperation rather than laziness. David arranged for Tyler to receive additional support and gave him the opportunity to retake the test honestly. Digital deception in the modern world. Much of our communication is digital. Reading digital deception requires different skills than reading face-to-face deception. In digital communication, you lose access to body language, facial expressions, and vocal cues. You must rely entirely on linguistic and behavioral patterns. Digital deception indicators include unusually formal or stilted language. The person is carefully constructing their messages, delayed responses to simple questions they are taking time to fabricate, inconsistencies between different messages. They cannot keep their lies straight, and excessive use of exclamation points or emotional language. They are trying to overcompensate for the lack of face-to-face emotional cues. The most reliable digital deception indicator is inconsistency. When someone tells different versions of the same story in different messages or to different people, the truth is somewhere in the gaps between the versions. Life example: an HR manager named Sandra was investigating a harassment complaint. The accused employee, Kevin, submitted a written statement denying the allegations. Sandra noticed that Kevin's statement was unusually formal and detailed. He had clearly spent a great deal of time crafting it. More importantly, when Sandra interviewed other employees who had been present during the alleged incidents, Kevin's written account did not match their observations. By comparing the different accounts, Sandra was able to construct a more accurate picture of what had happened. Kevin's carefully crafted statement, rather than protecting him, actually provided evidence against him because its inconsistencies revealed the gaps where the truth had been edited out. Part 5, Mastery and Application, Chapter 13, Building Rapport and Trust. Instantly reading people is not just about observation and analysis. It is about connection. The ultimate purpose of understanding human behavior is to build relationships, authentic, meaningful, productive relationships. And the foundation of all relationships is rapport and trust. The science of rapport is a state of harmonious connection between people. It is characterized by mutual understanding, comfort, and the sense that you are on the same wavelength. Rapport is not just a nice feeling, it has measurable effects. Research shows that people in a state of rapport are more persuasive, more cooperative, and more likely to help each other. Building rapport involves 3 key elements: pacing, matching, and leading. Pacing means meeting the other person where they are. If they are speaking slowly, you slow down. If they are speaking quietly, you lower your volume. If they are formal, you match their formality. Pacing communicates, I am like you. I understand you. You can trust me. Matching is the nonverbal component of pacing. You match their posture, their gestures, their facial expressions, and their energy level. This triggers mirror neurons in both you and the other person, creating a neurological sense of connection. Leading is what happens after rapport is established. Once you have established a connection through pacing and matching, you can gently shift your behavior and invite the other person to follow. If you want the conversation to become more energetic, you slowly increase your energy and see if they follow. If you want the conversation to become more serious, you gradually become more serious. Life example of Rachel, a real estate agent, was showing homes to a young couple, Mike and Lisa. She noticed that Mike was methodical and detail-oriented. He asked about square footage, property taxes, and school districts. Lisa was more emotional. She talked about how the kitchen felt, whether the backyard felt right, whether she could imagine their future children playing there. Rachel adapted her approach to match each person. With Mike, she focused on facts, numbers, and practical details. With Lisa, she focused on feelings, possibilities, and the emotional experience of the home. She paced Mike's analytical style and Lisa's emotional style simultaneously, making both feel understood and valued. By the end of the showing, both Mike and Lisa felt that Rachel truly understood what they were looking for. They trusted her judgment and made an offer on the house that day. Rachel's ability to read their different styles and adapt accordingly had built instant rapport with both of them. The power of active listening is the most powerful rapport-building tool available. It is also the most neglected. Most people do not listen. They wait for their turn to talk. Active listening involves fully concentrating on what the other person is saying, understanding their message, responding thoughtfully, and remembering what was said. Active listening has several components: maintaining comfortable eye contact, nodding and providing verbal affirmations, I see, that makes sense, go on, asking clarifying questions, paraphrasing what you heard to confirm understanding, and reflecting the emotions behind the words. Life example: a sales manager named Thomas noticed that his best salespeople were not the ones who talked the most. They were the ones who listened the most. His top performer, a woman named Diane, spent 70% of her sales conversations listening and 30% talking. She asked questions, let customers explain their needs, and only offered solutions after she fully understood the problem. Thomas compared Diane's approach with that of his worst performer, a man named Greg. Greg spent 80% of his conversations talking about product features, company credentials, and success stories. He rarely asked questions, and when he did not wait for complete answers before launching into his next point. The difference in results was dramatic. Diane consistently outsold Greg by a ratio of 3-to-1. Her customers felt heard and understood, which made them trust her recommendations. Greg's customers felt talked at, which made them skeptical of his claims. Building trust through vulnerability counterintuitively, showing vulnerability builds trust more effectively than projecting strength. When you admit uncertainty, acknowledge mistakes, or share personal struggles, you communicate authenticity. You say that I am human, just like you. I am not pretending to be perfect. This does not mean you should overshare or be inappropriately vulnerable. It means being genuine rather than performative. When you do not know an answer, say so. When you make a mistake, acknowledge it. When you are struggling, do not pretend everything is fine. Life example: a new manager named James was struggling to earn the trust of his team. He had been hired from outside the company, and the existing team members were skeptical of his qualifications and uncertain about his leadership style. James initially tried to project confidence and competence, but this only made the team more suspicious. They perceived him as inauthentic, all polished surface and no substance. Then James changed his approach. In a team meeting, he admitted that he was still learning the company's systems and processes. He asked for their help and advice. He acknowledged that his previous company had done things differently and that he was open to learning from their experience. This admission of vulnerability transformed the team's perception of James. They saw him as genuine and humble rather than arrogant and detached. Over the following weeks, the team began to open up to him, sharing their concerns, ideas, and suggestions. James's willingness to be vulnerable had built a foundation of trust that his polished presentation never could have. The neuroscience of trust is not just a feeling. It is a neurochemical process. When you interact with someone trustworthy, your brain releases oxytocin, which promotes bonding, generosity, and cooperation. When you interact with someone untrustworthy, your brain releases cortisol, which promotes vigilance, defensiveness, and avoidance. You can actually influence which neurochemical dominates by your behavior. When you are consistent, reliable, and honest, you stimulate oxytocin production in others. When you're inconsistent, unreliable, or deceptive, you stimulate cortisol production. This is why consistency is so important for building trust. Small, consistent actions, keeping promises, following through on commitments, being where you say you will be, build oxytocin over time. Grand gestures and dramatic promises do not build trust because they are not consistent. Life example: a therapist named Sandra noticed that her most successful therapeutic relationships were built not on breakthroughs or dramatic moments, but on small, consistent actions. Showing up on time, remembering what the patient said last session, following through on homework assignments, being consistent in tone and approach. These small actions created a sense of safety that allowed patients to be vulnerable and honest. The trust built through consistency was stronger than any single dramatic intervention could have been. The role of human humor is a powerful rapport-building tool because it creates shared positive emotions. When you laugh together, your brains release endorphins, which create feelings of bonding and pleasure. Humor also signals intelligence, creativity, and social awareness. However, the type of humor matters. Self-deprecating humor builds rapport because it signals humility and relatability. Humor that targets others can damage rapport because it signals aggression or insecurity. Sarcasm, while entertaining, can be misinterpreted and should be used carefully, especially with people you do not know well. Life example: a conference speaker named Alex noticed that the most effective speakers used humor strategically. They opened with a self-deprecating joke that made the audience feel at ease. They used humor to transition between heady topics, giving the audience a moment to process. And they closed with a humorous observation that left the audience feeling positive and connected. The least effective speakers tried too hard to be funny. They told jokes that felt forced and disconnected from the material. The audience could tell the humor was performative rather than genuine, and it actually decreased trust rather than building it. Chapter 14: Applying People Reading in Real-Life Theory Without Practice is Useless. This chapter will show you how to apply the principles and techniques from the previous chapters to real-world situations. Job interviews: whether you are the interviewer or the candidate, reading people is essential in job interviews. As an interviewer, watch for alignment between the candidate's words and body. When they describe achievements they're genuinely proud of, their gestures will open up, their eyes will brighten, and their voice will become more animated. When they are fabricating or exaggerating, watch for hesitation before key details, constrained gestures, and subtle signs of discomfort. As a candidate, read the interviewer. Are they leaning in and asking follow-up questions? They are engaged. Are they checking their watch or glancing at their computer? They are losing interest. Are their feet pointed toward you? They are invested in the conversation. Are they pointed toward the door? They are ready for the interview to end. Life example: Kevin, a software engineer, was interviewing for a position at a major tech company. During the technical discussion, he noticed that the interviewer's eyes lit up when he described a particular project involving machine learning. The interviewer leaned forward, asked detailed follow-up questions, and spent 15 minutes discussing the project in depth. Kevin recognized this as a signal of genuine interest. Rather than moving on to other topics, he stayed on the machine learning discussion, providing more detail and answering the interviewer's questions thoroughly. The interviewer's engagement continued to build throughout the conversation. After the interview, Kevin sent a thank you email that referenced the machine learning discussion specifically. The interviewer responded within minutes, expressing enthusiasm about Kevin's expertise. Kevin received an offer within a week. Romantic relationships: reading people is perhaps most important in romantic relationships, where the stakes are highest and the potential for self-deception is greatest. In the early stages of dating, pay attention to consistency. Does the person's behavior match their words? Do they follow through on promises? Are they the same person in public as they are in private? Consistency is the foundation of trust. Pay attention to how they treat people who can do nothing for them: waiters, service workers, strangers. This reveals their character more accurately than how they treat you, because you are someone they want to impress. Pay attention to how they handle disagreement and conflict. Do they listen to your perspective, or do they steamroll over it? Do they take responsibility for their mistakes, or do they blame you? Do they seek resolution, or do they seek to win? Life example: after her painful experience with Tom, Rachel developed a systematic approach to evaluating romantic partners. She paid attention to three things: how they treated service workers, how they handled disagreement, and whether their words and actions were consistent. Her next boyfriend, Mark, passed all three tests. He was consistently kind to servers, doormen, and strangers. When they disagreed, he listened to her perspective and sought compromise rather than victory. And his words and actions were remarkably consistent. He said what he meant and meant what he said. Rachel and Mark have been married for 12 years. The relationship has not been perfect. No relationship is, but it has been characterized by mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine partnership. Rachel credits her ability to read Mark's character early in the relationship with saving her from repeating the mistakes of her past. Business and leadership: in the business world, reading people affects everything: hiring decisions, negotiations, team dynamics, customer relationships, and strategic planning. The most effective leaders are those who can read the emotional state of their organizations. They know when morale is declining, when burnout is approaching, when a team member is struggling, and when a change in strategy is needed. They gather this information not through surveys or reports, though those are useful, but through observation. Life example, a CEO named Patricia transformed her company's culture by paying attention to the small things. She walked the floors daily, observing how people interacted. She noticed which teams had high energy and which were dragging. She noticed which employees seemed engaged and which seemed disengaged. She noticed which meetings were productive and which were a waste of time. Based on these observations, she made changes. She restructured teams based on energy and engagement levels. She gave struggling employees additional support. She eliminated meetings that were not productive and added meetings where communication was lacking. She addressed morale issues before they became crises. Within 2 years, the company's employee satisfaction scores had improved by 40% and productivity had increased by 25%. Patricia had not implemented any grand new strategy. She had simply paid attention to her people and responded to what she observed. Parenting reading your children is one of the most important and most challenging applications of people reading skills. Children are developing their emotional intelligence, and they need parents who can read their unspoken needs. Children often cannot articulate their emotions. A child who is acting out may not be defiant. They may be scared, frustrated, or lonely. A child who is withdrawn may not be lazy. They may be depressed, overwhelmed, or dealing with a social problem they do not know how to discuss. Reading a child requires patience and attention to context. The behavior itself is a signal, but it is not the message. The message lies in the context. What else is happening in the child's life? What has changed recently? What patterns of behavior you have observed over time? Life example, a father named Robert noticed that his 12-year-old daughter, Emma, had become increasingly irritable and withdrawn over the course of a month. She snapped at her siblings, refused to do homework, and spent most of her time in her room. Robert's initial instinct was to discipline Emma for her behavior, but he paused and paid attention. He noticed that Emma's irritability was worse on Monday mornings and Friday afternoons. He noticed that she seemed particularly distressed after checking her phone. He noticed that she had stopped talking about her friends, whom she had previously discussed constantly. Robert gently probed, and Emma eventually revealed that she was being bullied by a group of classmates through social media. The bullying was worst at the beginning and end of the school week, which explained the timing of her behavior. Robert helped Emma address the situation, working with the school and limiting her social media access until the bullying was resolved. Had Robert simply punished Emma's behavior without reading the signals beneath it, he would have added to her distress and missed the opportunity to help her with a serious problem. Chapter 15, The Mindset of a Master Observer. Mastering the art of reading people is not just about techniques and strategies. It is about cultivating a particular mindset, a way of being in the world that is characterized by curiosity, humility, and genuine interest in others. The curious mindset master observers are fundamentally curious about other people. They do not just notice behavior, they wonder about it. Why did she pause before answering that question? What made him light up when he mentioned his daughter? Why does she always sit with her back to the wall? This curiosity is not nosy or invasive. It is the same kind of curiosity a scientist brings to the natural world, a genuine desire to understand what is happening and why. Master observers approach every interaction as a learning opportunity, constantly refining their understanding of human nature. The humble mindset master observers are humble about their own abilities. They know that their readings can be wrong. They know that their biases and assumptions can distort their perceptions. They know that people are complex and that any single observation is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. This humility protects against the arrogance that comes with expertise. The most dangerous people readers are those who believe they can never be wrong. Their confidence becomes overconfidence, and their readings become projections of their own biases rather than accurate assessments of others. The non-judgmental mindset master observers observe without judging. They notice behavior, lying, manipulation, kindness, generosity, without immediately categorizing the person as good or bad. They understand that behavior is complex, context-dependent, often driven by forces that are not immediately visible. This non-judgmental stance allows master observers to see more clearly. When you judge someone, you stop observing. You place them in a category and filter all subsequent information through that category. When you observe without judging, you remain open to new information and willing to update your understanding. The patient mindset master observers are patient. They know that accurate reading requires time. First impressions are valuable, but they are not sufficient. People reveal themselves gradually through repeated interactions across different contexts. The person who seems trustworthy in a business meeting may reveal a different character at a social event. The person who seems cold and distant in a group may be warm and open one-on-one. Patience also means resisting the urge to act on incomplete information. When you notice a signal that concerns you, a microexpression of contempt, a verbal deflection, a shift in body language, it is tempting to immediately confront the person or change your behavior. But often, the best response is to observe further, gather more information, and make a decision when you have a more complete picture. The self-aware mindset master observers turn their observational skills on themselves. They recognize their own biases, triggers, and blind spots. They know that their emotional state affects their ability to read others. They know that their past experiences shape their interpretations of current behavior. This self-awareness is not just a nice-to-have, it is essential. Without it, your readings of others will always be contaminated by your own unexamined assumptions. You will see what you expect to see rather than what is actually there. Life example: a therapist named James had been practicing for 30 years. He had read thousands of patients, taught thousands of students, written extensively about human behavior, but he remained genuinely curious about people. Every new patient was a puzzle, and he approached each one with the fresh eyes of a beginner. James was also deeply humble. He told his students, the moment you think you have someone figured out, you have stopped seeing them. People are not puzzles to be solved. They are mysteries to be explored. This mindset, curious, humble, non-judgmental, patient, and self-aware, is what separates a competent people reader from a master observer. It is not something you achieve once and possess forever. It is a practice, a daily discipline, a way of being that requires constant cultivation. The practice of daily observation master observers practice their skills every day in every interaction. They turn ordinary conversations into opportunities for learning. They observe strangers on the bus, in coffee shops, in waiting rooms. They review their interactions at the end of each day, noting what they observed, what they missed, and what they could do better. This daily practice compounds over time. Each observation adds to your database of human behavior. Each reflection refines your interpretive skills. Each interaction provides feedback that helps you calibrate your readings. Life example: a college professor named Marie kept a daily observation journal. Each evening, she spent 15 minutes writing about the people she had interacted with that day. She noted specific behaviors: a student's posture during a difficult conversation, a colleague's vocal shift during a meeting, a stranger's micro-expression on the bus. Over the course of a year, Maria's journal filled with hundreds of observations. When she reviewed them, patterns emerged. She discovered that she was particularly good at reading vocal changes, but struggled with facial micro-expressions. She noticed that she often projected her own emotions onto others, interpreting their behavior through the lens of her own feelings rather than their reality. This self-knowledge allowed Maria to focus her practice on her weaker areas and guard against her biases. Her ability to read people improved dramatically, not because she learned new techniques, but because she practiced the ones she already knew with greater awareness and intentionality. The ethical dimension: with the ability to read people comes ethical responsibility. The skills in this book can be used for good or for ill. They can be used to build trust, deepen relationships, and help others. Or they can be used to manipulate, exploit, and control. The master observer chooses to use their skills ethically. They do not use their knowledge of human psychology to take advantage of others. They do not exploit vulnerabilities they discover. They do not use their ability to read people as a weapon. Instead, they use their skills in service of understanding and connection. They read people to understand them better, to communicate more effectively, to build stronger relationships, and to contribute more positively to the world around them. The ultimate measure of a master observer is not how accurately they can read others, but how well they use their reading to make the world a better place. The ability to see people clearly is a gift. What you do with that gift defines who you are. Conclusion: the journey to mastering the art of reading people is lifelong. There is no endpoint, no moment when you can say you have arrived. Human behavior is infinitely complex, and your understanding of it will always be incomplete, but the journey itself is profoundly rewarding. As you develop your ability to read people, you will find that your relationships deepen, your communication improves, your decisions become better, and your life becomes richer. You will see people, truly see them in ways you never have before, and in seeing them clearly, you will see yourself more clearly too. Because the ultimate truth of people reading is this: to understand others, you must first understand yourself. The journey outward always begins within. Start today. Pay attention. Observe. Listen. Wonder. And above all, be curious about the extraordinary, complicated, fascinating creatures that we call human beings.